Every Super Bowl, over 120 million Americans watch someone sing a song written by a man from Jacksonville, Florida. His name was James Weldon Johnson. He was the first black lawyer in Florida since Reconstruction, the first black professor at NYU. He led the NAACP for 10 years. He organized one of America's first civil rights marches. He served as a diplomat under 2 presidents. But chances are,
you must understand the gravity of this situation,
and the reason
Eliza.
why goes back
If
to
we
a
are
park
discovered,
in Jacksonville
there will be no
and a
mercy.
mob that almost killed him. This is the story of the most accomplished person to ever come from Florida and how America forgot him. Let me tell you what happened. James Weldon Johnson was born on June 17, 1871 in Jacksonville, Florida, just 6 years after the Civil War. His family was remarkable. His mother, Helen Louise Dillett, was a Bahamian immigrant, and she was Florida's first black female teacher. His father, James Johnson, worked as the head waiter at the prestigious Street James Hotel, one of the finest establishments in the city. They lived in La Villa, a neighborhood that had once been its own town, with black mayors, black councilmen, and black-owned businesses. This was Reconstruction-Era Florida. For a brief window of time, the federal government was actually protecting the rights of freed slaves. Young James grew up in a world where he was told he could be anything. His mother taught him piano, guitar, and how to read music. She instilled in him a deep love of literature, poetry, and the European classical tradition. She raised him without any limits at all. But here is the thing, there was no high school for black students in all of Florida. So, at 16, James left for Atlanta University. It was there, during a summer teaching in rural Georgia, that James saw the other side of what black life in America really looks like. He later wrote that no period meant so much in his education for life as those 3 months he spent teaching in the backwoods of Georgia. He saw poverty. He saw the descendants of slaves still trapped in cycles of debt and oppression, and he decided to do something about it. In 1894, James graduated from Atlanta University, and then he did something that would have seemed impossible just decades ago. He went home to Jacksonville, and he became principal of the very school he had attended as a child. It was called the Stanton School. But he did not stop there. He was about to become a man of many firsts, starting with something no black Floridian had done in decades. He decided to become a lawyer, and not just any lawyer. He was going to break a barrier that had stood since the end of Reconstruction. While working as principal, James taught himself law by reading in a white lawyer's office. His mentor was a man named Thomas Ledwith. In 1897, James Weldon Johnson sat for the Florida bar exam. It was brutal. A 2-hour oral test before 3 white attorneys. The courtroom was packed with people. Everyone wanted to see what would happen. One examiner, unable to watch a black man succeed, stormed out. As he left the room, he muttered a racial slur. But James passed anyway. He became the first black man admitted to the bar since Reconstruction. Let that sink in. This was 1897, 30 years after slavery ended, and he was still breaking ground that should have been broken.
Get these bundles tied quickly.
In 1895, he had already founded the Daily American, which was Florida's first black daily newspaper. As principal of Stanton, he added 9th and 10th grade, making it Florida's first black public high school. He was reshaping his entire city. And then there was his brother, John Rosamond Johnson, 2 years younger, a musical prodigy who had trained at the New England Conservatory. The brothers were inseparable.
What if
James
the bass
wrote
line
words,
walks up
Rosamond
instead?
Yes,
wrote
that
music.
gives it a real
Together,
bounce.
they were
I
about
like
to
that
create
immensely.
something that would outlive them both. In early 1900, a group of young men in Jacksonville were planning a celebration for Abraham Lincoln's birthday on February 12th. They asked James to give an address at the event, but James wanted to do something more. He wanted to write a poem, something truly special. He tried to write about Lincoln, but the words would not come. So he took his idea to his brother. They decided to write a song instead. James paced the front porch of their family home in La Villa. Rosamond sat at the piano inside. They passed stanzas back and forth to each other. The first line came easily, "Lift every voice and sing," but then James hit a wall. He ground through the next 5 lines with great difficulty. And then something happened. Near the end of the first stanza, 2 lines came to him. "Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us." James later wrote that the spirit of the poem had taken hold of him completely. He stopped using pen and paper. He paced back and forth, repeating the lines, going through what he called all the agony and ecstasy of creating. As he finished the final stanza, something broke inside him. He later wrote that he could not keep back the tears and made no effort to do so. Feverish ecstasy was followed by that contentment, that sense of serene joy, which makes artistic creation the most complete human experience. Rosamond composed music that matched the poetry perfectly. Triumphant, noble, uplifting. They sent the manuscript to their publisher in New York. On February 12, 1900, 500 schoolchildren at the Stanton School sang "Lift Every Voice and Sing" for the very first time. The brothers moved on to other projects after that. They did not think much more about it, but those children who sang it, they never forgot it. James later wrote that the school children of Jacksonville kept singing it. They went off to other schools and sang it. They taught other children. Within 20 years, it was being sung across the South. Copies were pasted into the backs of hymnals and songbooks. It spread like a wildfire. In 1919, the NAACP would officially adopt it as the Negro National Anthem. But by then, James had already left Jacksonville forever. As the 1890s turned into the 1900s, something was changing in Jacksonville. Something dark. Progress was being erased. The white Southern establishment was systematically stripping away the rights that black citizens had fought so hard to gain after the Civil War. Jim Crow laws spread like a disease across the South. Voting restrictions, segregation. The promise of equality was being strangled in its crib. And then, one day, in Jacksonville, James Weldon Johnson learned just how dangerous it had become to be a successful black man in the Deep South. He was in Riverside Park with a colleague, a female journalist. She was light-skinned, light enough that a mob assumed she was a white woman. A crowd gathered around them. They saw a black man with what they believed was a white woman. In that era, in that place, that was a death sentence. James Weldon Johnson, lawyer, principal, newspaper founder, came within inches of being lynched in his own city in broad daylight for nothing. He survived that day, but Jacksonville would never feel the same to him again. He later wrote that the city became a 100% cracker town. The place that had once been known far and wide as a good town for Negroes had become hostile and dangerous. It was no longer home to him. And then, on May 3rd, 1901, something else happened. Something that would change the city of Jacksonville forever. A fire started. Around noon, a spark from a wood-burning stove ignited Spanish moss at a mattress factory in La Villa, the very neighborhood where James grew up. The Great Fire of 1901 burned for 8 hours. It destroyed over 2,000 buildings. 7 people died. 10,000 lost their homes. It was the largest metropolitan fire ever recorded in the American South. The smoke could be seen as far north as Raleigh, North Carolina that day. James later wrote that the fire might not have been so destructive if the authorities had not been so racist, too slow to help black neighborhoods. In the aftermath of the fire, the Johnson brothers made a decision. Jacksonville was no longer a place where they could thrive or build a future. In 1901, James and Rosamond Johnson left Florida for New York City. They joined what would later be called the Great Migration North. James was 30 years old when he left. He had built institutions in Jacksonville, a newspaper, a high school, a legal practice. He left it all. But what awaited him in New York would make him a national figure, and eventually one of the most important civil rights leaders of his generation. In New York, the Johnson brothers became Broadway songwriters. Within a few years, they were earning $12,000 a year, a fortune then. They wrote over 200 songs for the Broadway stage. They elevated black music from minstrel stereotypes to sophisticated artistic compositions. But James wanted more than commercial success. In 1906, President Theodore Roosevelt offered him a diplomatic post serving the nation. James became United States Consul to Venezuela and later Nicaragua, a black man from Jacksonville representing America on the world stage abroad. During his time abroad, he wrote his most famous novel, The Autobiography of an Ex-Colored Man, a groundbreaking work of American literature. In 1910, he married Grace Nail, a civil rights activist and arts patron who would become his partner in everything for the rest of his life. By 1914, James was back in New York, and he was about to become involved with an organization that would define the rest of his legacy. The NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, had been founded just 5 years earlier, in 1909 in New York. James joined as field secretary in 1916. And almost immediately, he faced one of the darkest moments in all of American racial history. In July 1917, white mobs attacked the black community of East Street, Louis, Illinois. Between 50 and 200 people were murdered. Men, women, and children were drowned, beaten, lynched, and burned alive. 6,000 survivors fled their burning homes to escape the violence. James Weldon Johnson decided to respond to this horror, and his response would become one of the most powerful protests in all American history. On July 28, 1917, he organized the Silent Protest Parade. 10,000 black New Yorkers marched down Fifth Avenue in silence. Children dressed in white led the march, followed by women in white, followed by men in black suits. The only sound was the beat of muffled drums. They carried banners that read things like, "Mother, do lynchers go to heaven?" and "We have fought for the liberty of white Americans in 6 wars." Johnson later wrote that the streets of New York had witnessed many strange sights, but he judged, "Never one stranger than this silent procession." Among the watchers were those with tears in their eyes. It was one of the first mass demonstrations by African Americans in all of United States history. The Silent Parade launched the NAACP's public campaign against lynching. It drew national attention to violence that had been ignored for decades. In 1920, James Weldon Johnson became the first black executive secretary of the NAACP. He would lead the organization for the next 10 years. Under his leadership, the NAACP fought for anti-lynching legislation. Johnson testified before Congress. He met with senators. He never stopped pushing. The dire anti-lynching bill passed the House in 1922, but died in the Senate. It took another 100 years to become federal law. But Johnson believed the fight itself mattered. He later wrote that the debate brought home to the American people the horror of lynching as never before. Throughout the 1920s, James became a central figure in the Harlem Renaissance, the great flowering of black art, literature, and music. He published the Book of American Negro Poetry in 1922. It was the first major anthology of black poetry in the English language. In 1927, he released God's Trombones, a collection of poems that captured the voice of black Southern preachers. It is still read today.
The Renaissance
he mentored
is not
young
merely a
writers
moment,
like
but a
Langston
movement
Hughes
of
and
the
Zora
soul.
Neale
Indeed,
Hurston.
we are
He helped
defining the
define what it
future by
meant to be both
reclaiming the
black
past.
and
To the
American
future,
at the
then.
same time. In 1930,
The
at age
sociological
59,
implications
James
are
retired
clear,
from the
given the recent
NAACP.
migration
He accepted a
patterns.
professorship at Fisk
Indeed.
University, a historically
Dubois'
black
theories on
college.
the
In 1934, he made history again, becoming the first black professor at New York University. Another barrier broken by James Weldon Johnson. And then, on June 26, 1938, while vacationing in Maine with his wife Grace, tragedy struck without any warning at all. Their car was hit by a train at a railroad crossing. James Weldon Johnson died instantly from the impact. He was 67 years old that day. More than 2,000 people attended James Weldon Johnson's funeral in Harlem. It was one of the largest gatherings the neighborhood had ever seen.
Though
Gene
his
Buck,
voice
president
is
of ASCAP,
stilled,
delivered the eulogy.
the
He said
echoes of
Johnson
his
had
kindness
nobility,
will
culture,
resonate in
infinite
Harlem
taste, and a burning desire for
generations
learning
to
and
come.
tolerance. Johnson's ashes were interred at Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, New York. And then, slowly but surely, America began to forget who he was. Not the song. The song lived on and spread far and wide. But the man behind it, his name faded from textbooks. His story was erased from history. And in Jacksonville, the city where he was born, where he broke barriers, where he wrote the anthem, almost nothing remains of his legacy today. His family home, demolished decades ago. The Stanton School, where those 500 children first sang his song, rebuilt, renamed, its history buried.
This
For
rare
decades, the most
archival
prominent
photograph
landmark in
captures
downtown
Hemming
Jacksonville
Park in
was
the early
Hemming
20th
Park,
century,
named after a Confederate
dominated by
veteran
the
who
Confederate
donated a
monument at
Confederate
its center.
monument. It was not until 2020, amid the George Floyd
renaming of
protests,
this
that
space
Jacksonville
to James
finally
Weldon
renamed it
Johnson
James
Park
Weldon Johnson
marks a
Park
significant
after
moment for
100
Jacksonville.
years. One local writer put it bluntly: James Weldon Johnson is direly under-celebrated in Jacksonville. Most historic sites associated with him have been demolished. So why did this happen? Why did America forget the man who wrote one of its most powerful songs? The man who led the fight against lynching for years?
Now-
The answer is
Now,
uncomfortable.
as you can see
For much
on
of the
the
20th
map,
century,
the
black
Louisiana
history was
Purchase
simply not
doubled
taught in
the
schools,
size of our
not
great
preserved,
nation.
not valued
This
by
was
the
the
nation.
first-
Johnson was too complex to fit into the simplified narratives that white America preferred. He was a lawyer, a poet, a diplomat, and an activist all at once. He challenged the idea that black excellence was rare or exceptional. His very existence was a threat to the stories white supremacy told itself daily. And so his story was quietly set aside and forgotten. His song was sung in black churches, black schools, black communities, but rarely in the mainstream. Until 2020. Until George Floyd. Until America was forced to confront its racial history in ways it had long avoided and tried to suppress. Suddenly, Lift Every Voice and Sing was everywhere you looked. Sung at protests across the nation, played at NFL games, performed at the Super Bowl. In 2021, the NFL made it a permanent part of Super Bowl festivities. The song James wrote on his porch now reaches 120 million. And in February 2025, at Super Bowl 59, 125 high school students sang it to celebrate its anniversary. James Weldon Johnson once wrote that the song repays him in an elation, almost of exquisite anguish, whenever he hears it sung by Negro children. He never knew how far it would travel. He never knew it would be sung at Super Bowls, at inaugurations, at protests that would reshape all of America. But he knew what he was writing about. Faith
With
in
the
the face
dawn
of darkness.
comes a profound
Hope in the
sense
face
of hope.
despair. The belief that a better day was surely coming. Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring. Ring with the harmonies of liberty. That is what he wrote on his porch in Jacksonville. That is not a protest song. That is not a divisive song. That is a song about the best of what America could be if it chose to be that nation. James Weldon Johnson deserves to be in every history book in this country. His story deserves to be told. And now, finally, it is being heard.
In the
If you
heart
want to
of
learn more,
downtown
visit
Jacksonville,
James Weldon
this
Johnson
vibrant
Park in
park
Jacksonville,
honors the
or read
legacy
his
of James
autobiography
Weldon Johnson,
Along This Way.
a true
His
pioneer
words
of the
still ring
Harlem
true
Renaissance.
today.
James
If
Weldon
this story
Johnson's
moved
legacy
you,
extends
share it with
far
someone,
beyond the
because the
Harlem
best way to
Renaissance.
honor James
His
Weldon
words
Johnson
continue to
is to make
inspire
sure
the
he
fight
is
for
never
civil rights
forgotten
today.
again. Subscribe for more stories like this one, hidden American histories that deserve to be told. I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.